Yesterday, Ferrari trialled out their newly revised SF25 rear suspension, which is a complete redesign of it, with both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc getting equal time within the SF25 to see how it felt for both of them. Now, Ferrari have, to all accounts, had a successful test. That is what has been reported, and this will now be debuted at the next race in Spa. But of course, a lot of you may not have seen the actual changes made, nor know why they've made these changes. So that's what we're going to be getting into within this video. So let's get into it. Now, Ferrari's rear suspension, which has been completely revised, features many new design elements. They've had an increase in the anti-squat for the new rear suspension, and while it is not in the extremities of, say, Mercedes' design, it is still an improvement over what they had. But Ferrari seem to be running a kind of balancing act here. They don't want to go too far or too extreme in either direction, with not having enough anti-squat or having too much anti-squat integrated within this new rear suspension. You can quite clearly see the suspension arms have had a complete redesign in the geometry levels, with the new one now far more lower down than the original specification they started this season with. That is what introduces the anti-squat, or the improved levels of anti-squat for this new suspension. And this is just making sure that Ferrari, with regards to this major issue they've had in this season, which is of course that the original suspension didn't have enough resistance to squat under acceleration, which is why they had to raise the ride height often in the first half of the season, thus losing load and downforce points as a result. And of course this had a secondary issue of them having plank wear. So it was a multitude of issues which stemmed from the levels of squat that they had at these huge levels of compression, particularly in the high-speed corners. That's why in China, for example, they were disqualified in the main race, because they miscalculated the amount of plank wear as a result of that. Now, Ferrari have retained their pull rod configuration, as we were expecting to be the case. Changing a rear suspension at this point in the season to push rod is just far too big a challenge to be doing at the halfway point. You would spend so many Grand Prix trying to kind of relearn everything, recalibrate all the setups as you would go along, and you would just lose too much time and effort by doing so. Now, in terms of what they've done to the internal redesigning of their suspension, we will never see that, but it is being reported they have made changes to the internal kind of points within their rear suspension to kind of help with this anti-squat regard. Now, very briefly, why did Ferrari choose Mugello over that of, say, their private racetrack or Fiorano? Well, quite simply, the Mugello circuit enables Ferrari to have a better baseline in terms of the complete different speed ranges of corners around the Mugello circuit. There is far more differing speed ranges than, say, to that. If we compare it to Fiorano, Fiorano has literally no high speed corners, it's all slow and medium speed. So for Ferrari, with the majority of their issues coming at high speed corners because of the compression on there, that is of course why they've chosen to move the testing day, or the filming day rather, to Mugello, which is more in line with the majority of Formula One circuits, particularly as this is and was a circuit F1 used to race around. Now, with regards to this very kind of rigorous setup that they're going to be running for the rear suspension, of course we don't know what it is, but I think what we can state from within this time frame of this next 100 kilometers, it is all about making sure they're running the car to the extremities that they possibly can. So I think they will start off with the most extreme setup they can choose to use for this new rear suspension on the SF75 to see whether it can cope with the rigors that come from running it so extreme. And say if they find on the initial feedback from both Leclerc and Hamilton that that's not the case. They will dial back the extremeness until they find that kind of correct balance and working window from which they don't have these issues. So it could be something of a trial and play around with the setup to see how things go. But of course, Ferrari hope and aimed with this new rear suspension to run it to the extremities that they possibly could. Now, if that is the case and things go as Ferrari hope, I think we can expect very, very good things from them, particularly with regards to us heading to Spa in a couple of weekends' time at the commencing of the second half of the season. Now, even before this rear suspension, Ferrari were very excited to go there. There's a lot of high-speed corners where they don't have so many issues because, of course, with Spa being practically long straights and high-speed corners with very few medium and low speed, you can really kind of set up the car within one working window, one operating window in terms of the speed range of corners. There's less compromise that has to be placed on the car in terms of setup as a result of that. And I think Ferrari were going to have a very competitive weekend regardless of this rear suspension. So imagine if this suspension that they've brought to Mugello works as they've wanted and it's unlocked a huge amount of performance, or maybe 1 to 2 tenths or 3 tenths even, who knows what Ferrari have kind of hidden within the peak of their downforce and load. Now, if they could add that on to the already kind of upturn in performance we saw in Silverstone, where they were just half a tenth off from getting pole position, that would put them in the ballpark of getting a very, very fantastic result in Spa before the updated floor then arrives in time for Hungary, because there is a couple of updates coming. One is, of course, the suspension, but even more importantly, the floor, because there is belief within the Ferrari camp this floor is not going to favour Hamilton more than that of Leclerc. Hamilton is presumed to have a more struggle with regarding this new rear suspension with the current floor, and therefore they've brought and designed a new specification for Hungary to help alleviate those problems with regarding Hamilton and the general feel he wants out of the SF25 in its newly updated guise. So fingers crossed for Ferrari and just Formula One in general. I think if this works, it's going to put them right in the ballpark of being highly competitive, regardless of, say, Red Bull's upgrade package that they have for Spa, or what, say, McLaren or any of the other big teams like Mercedes bring to Spa and beyond. I think what we've seen, Ferrari can have a very kind of general performance trend moving forward, whereas I think Mercedes and Red Bull, they're still going to have dips throughout the second half of the season where they're sometimes highly competitive and sometimes very much the opposite, completely out of the working window in terms of setup and drivability and ride height and all the other kind of variable factors that inevitably can come into play, such as the weather and the tarmac heat levels and all of those sorts of things. But all in all, let's hope Ferrari